Hey guys, what's going on? It is Ash here coming at you today in Clash Royale, sharing with you guys my new favorite miner control deck. Actually, scratch that. This is my new favorite deck in the entire game. In fact, this is the deck that I'm going to be playing, I think, at least as of right now, in the King's Cup tournament. I absolutely love it a lot. Here's a different variation if you want to explore using the Mini P.E.K.K.A. and the Goblins, but both of the decks do have the Princess, the Log, and the Miner, so these are three legendary decks. I want to talk to you guys briefly about some legendary substitutions. Now, with any miner control deck, the miner is your main proxy as well as your win condition. Obviously, we're relying heavily on the rocket as well, but the miner is pretty important in this deck. It's really difficult to replace the miner, unfortunately for you guys. If you have to replace the miner, you're going to want to use either Goblin Barrel or Hog Rider, but it's not going to work in the same fashion that it's meant to, at least the one we're reviewing today. Beyond that, the Princess and the Log. The Princess and Arrows are a good substitution, and the Log and Zap are a good substitution if you're looking for substitutes for those two cards. Now you can see here my battle log is looking really good. Last night I had my very first 12-0 grand challenge with this deck, but unfortunately all the replays were wiped because I did play. I snuck in quite a few matches today at work. Just don't tell my boss. Shh. And what we're going to do in today's video is really cover all the strategy keys to this deck, as well as we're going to be watching replays, so I should be able to actually do a halfway decent job at commentating throughout this video. And it's actually good to watch replays sometimes where you can see what the opponent is doing at the same time, because obviously you can't see that in live matches. So what we're going to do is start out with this replay here. It's actually one of my favorites of the entire video. I was really hoping that this match would make it to TV Royale. I've never been on TV Royale, and this match is a great match to have on TV Royale because it is literally a last-second victory on my part, not to mention my opponent is 100% maxed out, so certainly I was an underdog going into this match. Now, I'm curious, have any of you guys ever made TV Royale? I'm kind of jealous if some of you have. I'm sure some of you have, so let me know if you have and what arena you were in. I feel like it's really difficult to make TV Royale as a non-top 100 player, especially in Legendary Arena, because Legendary TV Royale does strongly favor players who are in the top 100. But anyway, here you can see I'm playing some solid defense right now, really trying to distract this P.E.K.K.A. I do not want him to get to my tower, and defensively, this deck really has a ton of weapons. Now, I should know about the rocket that I very rarely use it on defense, maybe in a really big pinch if, for example, the opponent was coming at me with barbarians and a hog rider at the same time, or a minion horde. Basically anything over 9 elixir coming in my lane, I would go ahead and use the rocket. Otherwise, I'm going to rely on the plethora of other defensive cards in this deck. I have the Knight, who's actually a really good defensive card, one of the best cards in the game for kiting. Some people could use the Ice Golem if you prefer to, but me, I kind of like the Knight, and I do have the Knight maxed out for ladder play. But if you guys want to play the Ice Golem in that spot, by all means do so. He can totally fit in, and he's a little bit cheaper too, and with the new AoE damage, all for the better. Now here you can see I know my opponent has the freeze spell, so I'm always going to be super aware of when he's going to play the freeze. So how am I going to combat that freeze spell that my opponent has? The number one thing I'm going to do is delay my defensive plays as long as possible. That way he can't freeze all my units, including the Inferno Tower. So you're going to see the rest of this match here, and like I said, we do take the whole minute of overtime here. You're going to see when I play something defensively, I'm going to wait to do it at the last second, and I'm not going to play extra cards defensively unless I really have to. See, the Inferno Tower was a great example of that. What I did was I waited a little bit, he used the freeze spell, and then I placed the Inferno Tower at the last second. That way he wouldn't freeze my Inferno Tower. Now, I'm obviously relying on the I was going to call her the Archer Queen, the Princess, very heavily on defense. So what I like to do is play the Princess behind the tower. In this match, I'm being a little bit more risky with her, placing her to the side of the tower because my opponent doesn't have the log, but you always have to be cognizant of if your opponent does have the log. There's really two things that you need to consider with your Princess. Number one is place her behind the tower if at all possible. possible to protect her from the log, while at the same time still being able to target and take down that minion horde or whatever's coming in the lane. And the second thing is, after my opponent gets a lot of damage to one of my towers, I switch the lane of the princess. Now look at this here, guys. My opponent misses with his rocket. He places it wrong. You can tell he guessed where I was going to put the miner, and instead I did the miner, rocket, and log to pick up the win with literally 1 second left on the clock. Wow, that was absolutely insane. I can't believe that that ended in that way. I was really happy, and that was the one that I was hoping, because I'm not sure if you guys know this, a little inside info here, but TV Royale favors matches that end in the last couple seconds. So whenever you have a last second win, there's a decent shot, or a shot, maybe not decent, but there is a shot more than your average match that you'll make it to TV Royale. So let's go ahead and hop into the next match here. This is going to be against a classic Goizen deck. And I know what you're saying. People still use Goizen, and yes, the answer is yes, apparently. So what I'm going to do here is play the knight defensively, and as soon as I see that Elixir collector next to a tower, that is number one. Absolutely, I am going to use my rocket, no doubt about it, and I'm going to use it very fast because I don't want my opponent to get any value out of that Elixir collector. Rather than waiting a few extra seconds there to see what my opponent's going to do, I did it right away because that gives it an even better Elixir trade for yours truly. So here I'm going to go ahead and let these guards go ahead and target my tower. I'm going to distract one of them with the Inferno tower. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I want to save my log for this incoming prince over here. The log obviously stops the prince charge, and now that the poison is not going to be slowing my units, it's a really easy defend on my part. So at this point, I'm thinking this is pretty easy. This is a really easy matchup for me. The control decks are generally really good against any kind of beatdown deck, so this is really right up my alley here. So I have a mega minion coming at me. No big deal. I'm going to place the princess again in the opposite lane to play defense in the left lane. Now my opponent did kind of a strange thing here, and he played a solo giant in the lane. I think he thought that I had way less elixir than I did, but I'm able to defend pretty well with a mega minion and an ice spirit, and you can see here we're almost tied in elixir, and I have 5 elixir already on the map in the form of the mega minion and the princess. So now he plays an elixir collector right in the middle of the map. I get 3 hits on that elixir pump with my princess, and that's a big win for yours truly. I mean, I got 3 hits off with a princess, and what does that mean? That means they get no value out of that elixir pump. It's a win for me. Yeah, buddy. So I just pulled a really aggressive move there. I was at full elixir, I sent in the miner, I delayed a second thinking that because his tower was a little bit low on HP that he would have to defend against my solo miner, and then I preemptively launched that rocket right away thinking it would destroy at least whatever he counters my miner with, and then get a lot of HP off that tower, which I really need to do. So that's one of the things with this deck. I don't like to do this early on in a match. I should stress that. Very important. If you're going to use a rocket like that very aggressively, don't do it in the beginning of the match, guys. That type of a move is mainly going to be reserved for double elixir time, because you can see right now I'm still able to have enough elixir to defend properly against their counter push. But if you do a move like that, sending in a miner and then a rocket early like that, you're running into real big time trouble on the other end if you can't defend fast enough. So just be very careful when you do that. Now there are 4 main offensive combinations / weapons in this deck, and over the next replay I'm going to talk about all 4 of them and hopefully how you can capitalize on using all 4 of those offensive combinations to hopefully win more matches than you lose, because that's what the game's all about. Winning more than you lose. So one offensive weapon is the princess. Now again, if you guys don't have the princess, well, that's not going to be one of your offensive weapons. But again, with the princess, you can see right here, I opened up this match with the princess really early on, and I do want to quickly digress and talk about this move that I'm making in the left lane. I do have a rule that I kind of hold myself to regarding what to do with a deck like this when your opponent plays a really expensive unit behind their tower. tower. So what I like to do is I like to push the opposite lane, but I really have hard and fast rules for myself that I like to keep and hold myself to in terms of elixir usage on my part. And what is that rule? Well, mainly I don't like to spend more than 6 elixir usually on offense on my counter lane push, and then I sit back and wait for defense. Now in that it was probably a bad example because I used 7 elixir. I used the miner, the mega minion, and the ice spirit. And you can see that in turn my opponent HBG, who's actually one of our better players in Elite Gaming, he had to devote a lot of elixir to defending my push in the left lane. Therefore, he didn't have anything really besides the Goblin Barrel to play along with the Golem in the right lane. And against the Goblin Barrel with this deck, it's very easy to just use the log. Again, if you don't have the log, you can just use a zap. It's a pretty easy counter, and you still have the ice spirit, the princess. You have a lot of cards to still use against these cycle bait type decks. So you just got to be careful. So now that I know the deck that he's playing, I'm going to start using my first offensive weapon pretty aggressively, and that's the princess on the bridge. Now I don't open up a match similar to using a rocket early on in the match. I will not use a princess on the bridge early on until I know what my opponent has. I actually opened up this match playing the princess behind in the back of my king tower. That's what I like to do to start out a match, and I very, very, very rarely play the princess on the bridge unless I know my opponent doesn't have a log up in their cycle or in their deck. So because I know HGP has the log, I want to be very, very careful with my princess, and that's probably bad timing as she just fell to the log, but you guys get the point. So now I'm going to use my next princess a little bit further back to try to stymie this minion horde coming at me in the left here, but let's kind of move on and talk a little bit about the rocket and the rest of the offensive combinations in this deck. So before we do that, let's kind of take a small step back and kind of review the philosophy and the mentality that you're going to be playing this control deck and really any control deck with. So I always think defense first with this deck specifically. So what I want to do is be aware of what my opponent's playing, and then I want to counter it, and then I have a decision to make. So if I counter what my opponent is playing with, say, a mega minion and an ice spirit, for example, which is a very common defensive counter in this deck, what I want to do is if my mega minion survives, then my number one option would be to play my miner if it's available on the tower to tank for the mega minion. I won't add anything else, maybe a princess on the bridge depending on what my opponent counters my miner mega minion with. For example, if they play a minion horde, I will definitely play the princess. But otherwise, I'm going to react to my opponent. I'm not just going to blow all my elixir on a super aggressive push. So definitely keep in mind that this is a chip deck. You're probably not going to do all your damage in one big fell swoop, so don't play the deck that way. You probably just won't have success with it, and you'll just be frustrated. So those are two of the offensive combinations, right? You have the every time you use a mega minion on defense, try to pair it for a counter push, a small counter push on offense. What I like to do a lot of times is play the miner after the mega minion gets around the bridge area, and then what I'll do is I'll play just the ice spirit along with the mega minion. That can create problems for a lot of opponents to defend against. For example, if they play minions against the mega minion and I have the ice spirit behind my mega minion, then I can go ahead and easily take down the minions without having a lot of damage off my mega minion. There's a lot of minions in this conversation today. So beyond those counter pushes, basically all I'm doing with this deck is the other two options are the rocket, the solo rocket against the tower, which like I said, I like to reserve for the last minute of a match if possible, and the last one is the miner solo. So the miner solo on a tower is actually a good way to even open up a match, because what it can do is scout your opponent in some ways. So if you play a miner against your opponent's tower to open up a match, oftentimes you'll see right away what type of deck they're playing, because sometimes they'll over defend against that solo miner, just kind of assuming that more units are on the way, more cards are on the way on your part, but really you're just kind of scouting them out, and at the same time, hopefully if they don't play anything against the miner, maybe they're waiting to see what you play next, you'll still get a few hundred HP off that tower. So using the miner for chip damage throughout the entire match is actually a really good idea. Now I tend to struggle more against air decks with this this control deck, so I wanted to bring this last replay to you guys and show you how I kind of have to get a little bit more aggressive than I want to with the rocket as this kind of match goes on and on and on. So you can see right now there's not a heck of a lot of damage off my opponent's tower. I'm being kind of aggressive with the princess, more aggressive than I usually am, playing her on the bridge, just trying to get as much damage as I possibly can to that tower. I was at full elixir, so I went ahead and used a rocket solo against the tower, knowing that my opponent was going to play a lava hound right off the bat, thinking that they'd catch me with very, very few elixir left. And indeed, I only had 4 or 5 elixir at the time that they played the lava hound, but I knew I had a lot of my good cycle defensive cards up in terms of the Inferno Tower and the Ice Spirit, and I had the log as well if I needed it. So what I'm going to do here at this point is use the log against the skeleton army, and then I'm going to kind of sit back a little bit, recoup some elixir. I know that all I need is 2 rocket shots left, and I have the whole overtime to get it done. So what I'm trying to do here is play defense with a princess, again in the opposite lane. I don't want those arrows going against my tower, so I'm going to try to chip away with a miner here. Unfortunately, I'm unsuccessful, but the reason that I set the miner solo onto that tower was because I assumed my opponent would play the skeleton army, and I wanted to use the log for some more chip damage onto that right tower. Now I have my opponent right where I need him, and I have the good defense lined up with the Inferno Tower down. I have my Mega Minion, I have everything ready, and I have my rocket up. So all I need to do is mount a defense here, and then I'm going to go ahead and play the rocket. Now, I messed up there. I shouldn't play that miner. I don't know why I did, but all I needed was a rocket, and again, with only 3 seconds left in overtime, I pulled off another victory. So guys, that is going to do it for today's video. I asked you guys on Twitter what you wanted to see today between this, and I have 2 pro tips interviews. This very narrowly edged them out, but I will be bringing you a pro tips interview with Jordan covering Hog Cycle 7.0 and a pro tips interview with Surgical Goblin, where we'll go ahead and discuss his rocket chip deck. So a lot of good stuff on the way. Really excited about it. Just wanted to say thank you again, guys, for all the support, for sharing this with your clanmates and friends. I really, really appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much, and as always, take care, guys.